Okay, I think that'll work. We've got 15 responses. That's roughly maybe one or two less than we have in the room. So thank you, appreciate that, and turn the time over to Joanna.
All right, thank you, Tyler. So I wanted I'll introduce myself. My name is Joanna Wolkowski, and I lead portfolio and decision analysis at Pfizer. This is a topic that doesn't need as much explanation with this audience in terms of what we do, but suffice it to say that we do a lot of rigorous analyses around the investments that Pfizer makes for their R&D budget. We evaluate over 100 R&D programs. We integrate competitive insights. We think about what are the investments that we need to make in order to maximize our pipeline value in the near term, but also how do we think about delivering portfolio health and sustainability in the longer term. So I'm excited to be at DAG. This is a conference that many from my organization have attended in the past, and this is my first opportunity to be able to engage with this audience. So thank you for that. I'm excited also to share the stage with the folks that I will introduce in a second. But basically, given that this year's DAG conference explores the intersection of decision analysis and data science to help move decision-making to the next level, what we're going to explore are areas within pharmaceutical drug investment decision-making where machine learning can be relevant, insightful, and how we can think about that intersection a little bit more deeply. So the format for our panel is that we will introduce ourselves, or I'll introduce everyone, and they will lead with a point of view in terms of what are their perspectives about the intersection of AI and decision analysis. I'll then go to a few questions to tee up the discussion, and then I look forward to having a lot of engagement from all the folks in the audience today. So first, I'd like to introduce Leslie Lippard. Leslie is an associate director with Genentech's Research and Early Development Portfolio and Pipeline Planning Group. Prior to joining Genentech in 2014, she was an entrepreneur, a market researcher, a strategy consultant, and an engineer. In her work and personal life, Leslie frequently observes that the actions we take are not necessarily aligned to our values. Leslie, would you please share your point of view that human judgment will remain important?
Sure. Thank you. I think I want to just actually start by stepping back a little bit and reflecting on yesterday, right? So I come to decision analysis with the preconceived idea that decision analysis is primarily relevant for big D decisions, right? And what I heard yesterday was a lot of discussion about data science, artificial intelligence, and largely what people were talking about was what I would call not big D decisions. Things like how do you automate driving, things like that. And so that kind of actually reframed my thinking a little bit in terms of what decision analysis is or could be, and suggest to me that as a community we want to have some dialogue about where we draw the line around decision analysis, right? But what I will say is that, sort of with my perspective, big D decision making, in the world of pharma investments, I see that artificial intelligence has some application in certain elements of DA, but I don't really see that AI is going to displace DA. I can't imagine a world in which artificial intelligence is making decisions about what assets to move forward. I can't imagine a world in which AI is making the call in terms of how we do business or what business we do. Shall I stop there, or do you want more?
I think let's tee it up.
All right.
I think that'll be good. Hopefully, we'll get some questions coming in. So next, I want to introduce Julie Schiffman. She is the Vice President of the Customer Analytics Organization at Pfizer. Customer Analytics is a global organization of senior strategy, analytics, informatics, and technology professionals responsible for providing a coordinated and synergistic view of commercial analytics and insights across Pfizer's portfolio of investigational and inline medicines. Her team also serves as an analytics incubator for how the latest technologies, techniques, and analytic methods can be applied and scaled to meet business objectives. Julie, would you please share your point of view that AI will enhance decision-making, and though we have seen glimpses of it, we're nowhere close to actually executing?
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Prior to the role that I have today, I had led the function that Joanna leads today around portfolio and decision analysis, so this DA runs deep in my veins, and I'm excited to be here. I've spent the better part of the past 3 years very deep in the machine learning space and looking at data and understanding how we can use this technology and advancement to help with our, I would say, a lot of our big D decisions that we've got on the table. And what I would say is, to me, machine learning is an and, it's not an or right now. But I do believe at some point we can get there, maybe a little faster than we expect. What I'm finding is that we all know from a decision analysis perspective, it's all about the assumptions that we put on the table. And if we're doing our job right, it's probably 70% of our job or 80% of our job is getting the assumptions right, and then 20% of it is the math at the end. I feel like I've seen some real advancements on the machine learning side of how we can improve the assumptions of what we're looking at. So we all know we have inherent bias. We all know that sometimes we apply that bias, but facts are our friends. And to the extent that we can use machine learning techniques to potentially improve our assumptions, whether it's around timelines for our trials, whether it's around forecasts for our trials, whether it's around feasibility of different sites for our trials or risk for our trials, I see the possibility of machine learning cutting through some of the biases that we might have. Now, granted, that comes with a lot of caveats that you have to have the right data, you have to be able to replicate the analysis, you have to be able to have integrity within the data that you have. But I've been astounded what some of our data scientists have been able to do in terms of taking rich data sets that we have around clinical trials and being able to develop insights that somebody might had to have been a clinical trial expert for 20 years. So some of these assumptions might be fairly obvious to someone who's been running clinical trials for 20 years, but when you're able to take one of these data sets and apply them and come up with the similar insights to what that person had, the two can really complement one another together. And we know that cycle times is kind of the bane of our existence from a pharma perspective, the timeline it takes for us to get drugs to market. So if we can use machine learning capabilities to speed the rate at which we can execute our trials, even come to the decisions about our trials, I think we'll be better off. And if you notice, I only call it machine learning, because I also agree, like, I'm not sure we're at the AI perspective where, like, the machine is telling me something. But I do believe we're really on the cutting edge from a machine learning perspective and changing the speed at which we can analyze massive structured and unstructured data sets in a way that we haven't been able to before.
All right, thank you, Julie. Finally, I'd like to introduce Pratap Kedkar. Pratap is managing principal for ZS's global pharmaceuticals practice since 2012. He also founded and leads the firm's Advanced Data Science Group, which consists of 100-plus data scientists focusing on applications of AI and machine learning to multiple industries, including healthcare. Pratap holds a PhD in artificial intelligence from the University of California at Berkeley. Pratap, would you please share your point of view that DA will be disrupted by machines?
So I'm going to be the outlier. Thank you. But I think there are two elements to this change, this disruption. And so my argument is, not a replacement, but a significant change in what the job of the DA is. So two elements to that, and this is what we're seeing in healthcare. One is, I think Julie began to talk about this, what is data is changing. So for instance, I'll give you an example. Early pipeline research, the question is, should we even get into this particular therapy area for doing a trial? So what's the current state? Now, this would have taken 3 or 4 months for a biostatistician. With AI, the thing reads through PubMed and all your publications in 3 days. So you go out to lunch, you come back, it's there with a summary of, here are all the trials, this is what's broken down, it's read all the different publications and summarized it. So the data is hundreds of journal articles. It's not some data in a database, but it's really become key in changing how effective the expert is. Because the expert is not just relying on experience, they can actually essentially digest this data in a week. So that's an example of how data is getting reformulated, And so when we all think about, well, where are we going to get our assumptions? How are we going to measure uncertainty? Think of data as something very different from what you've historically thought of. So that's one. I think the second is, that's really exciting, is what AI and ML has done is it's enabled you to ask new questions in a way that you couldn't before. So an example, Leslie is absolutely right. Decision analysis has historically been applied to big D decisions. So the big D decision could be, well, beginning of phase 3, what's going to be really the commercial impact of this product? Get me an estimate. A big part of that estimate is, what are payers going to say? Are they going to pay for it? Will we get access? And we want to figure this out 5, 6, 8 years in advance. Well, in the US, 5 payers control half the lives. You put 5 payers, CMS, and a few other blues together, those 15 people will decide the fate commercially of your drug. So then break that capital D down to small d. What would each of these payers do when presented with this drug, given all the other things that are going to be there in the marketplace 7 years from now? Predict their decision. And give me all of that so that I can pull all of that into my big D. Now, that's something you never did. You just asked an expert, what do you think the access will be? Oh, I think we can get to 70%. Well, let's break that down. Is that really true? What happens with payer consolidation? What have these payers actually done as opposed to what they say they will do? So this idea that I can break the capital D down to questions which I never bothered to solve for before, because AI can help me do that, that also affects the quality of the big D decision. So those are the two ways in which, and this formulation, this interpretation of data as something very different, is the DA's new job. And so that's what I want to say, is that the DA, the way they think, will have to change significantly.
Thank you, Pratap. So I will open up the questions by asking our panelists a few from my end, and then I look forward to having all of you go online and submit your questions as well. So I'm going to start with you, Leslie. So I know that one of your perspectives is that as you're making forward-looking predictions, historical information may not always be a particularly good proxy. Some say that human judgment is prone to error, however, and it would be preferable to remove that error by using machine algorithms. What are your perspectives on that?
Well, I have mixed feelings about that. All right, so absolutely, if you can use machines to crunch a whole bunch of information that you can't possibly take in and give it back to you after lunch. Although I'd like to go to your 3-hour lunch as opposed to my 15 minutes at my desk. That's great. But what I see in my environment is that we focus a lot more on information that we have at hand, and we largely frame information that we don't know much about out of the problem. I'm in a research and early development organization. People are much more comfortable with data and things that they know. And in the main, I have some of my colleagues sitting in the back, and I'm watching to see if they stand up and leave the room when I say this. But in some ways, I think we spend too much time thinking about data, meaning things that we know, and not thinking about things that we don't know anything about. I don't know about all of your organizations. I don't want to say that my organization is particularly good or bad at that. Maybe some organizations are great at it. But in the sciences, I think we have a bias. People are smart. Probably 99% of the people I interact with on a daily basis did their PhD in something, right? They believe in investigating problems, in understanding science, and that's going to create a line of sight to something important. Whether or not the bit of the world that I know about is really relevant for the future, I worry about that.
Thank you, Leslie. Julie, you noted subject matter expertise is still needed to validate identified signals and separate them out from the noise. How do you foresee validation within pharmaceutical drug development when the cycle times are so long and sometimes it can be difficult to distinguish?
So what I would say is, and I've spent a lot of time trying to educate not only my organization, but senior leadership around machine learning and hopefully someday artificial intelligence, that there's a lot of noise that comes up through machine learning. And just because you apply some algorithms to something doesn't necessarily make it right away. And you have to actually work with the experts that you have to be able to validate the findings that you have. Now, hopefully over time, we're going to get better and better, and we're going to be able to develop better and better algorithms that don't churn as much noise. But today, we still need this. This is very new. And as we're developing these algorithms and applying it, whether it's to clinical trials, whether it's to finding rare disease patients, we've got to be able to talk with our medical community. We have to be able to talk with external KOLs. We have to be able to validate what we're finding as signals. And I'll say, and if all of you are working in this space or starting to work in this space, there is a, as Leslie said, there's a wealth of data that we have. The question is, how do you put that data in a digestible, usable format that you can actually apply the algorithms to, that you can actually replicate the data that you have? I think oftentimes we don't talk about replicability, but in this field, whether you're using real-world evidence, whether you're applying machine learning, if you can't replicate your findings off of the same data set multiple times, like that's a signal that something isn't necessarily going right. So I would say, as I said earlier, from a decision analysis perspective, you spend 70 to 80% of the time making sure the assumptions are right, and then you're doing the math at the end. From a machine learning perspective, you're spending 70 to 80% of the time getting the data in a format and getting the data sets in a way that you can actually apply the math algorithms at the end. And so you still need those experts at the table. Areas of machine learning around automation absolutely is going to replace some of the activities that we have. But machine learning in the area of insights and informing big D decisions, it's not replacing anyone at this point in time. And it's important to understand the distinction of whether you're talking about machine learning for automation and taking care of routine manual activities that we can move people off of, versus really driving insights around patient populations or trial design, where you still need to benefit from that expertise.
Thank you, Julie. Pratap, new AI methodologies may come to different conclusions about insights or could be used potentially to create those insights. When this situation occurs, how do you suggest that decision makers resolve the misalignment between different AI methodologies or between AI methodologies and human judgment?
So there's a couple of elements there. One is this interesting idea which was referred to earlier today, which is crowdsourcing. Prediction markets seem to work well for some things. And so what AI is beginning to do is to basically have that same idea. So it's like crowdsourcing, but you've got 1,000 algorithms instead of 1,000 people. So that's one idea that's actually gained quite a lot of currency. So that's one way to do it technically. But I think the more interesting idea is AI has given you some answer, or ML has given you some answer. How do you combine it with human judgment? And I think this theme came up yesterday. I think this is really, really key, because we are finding, and one way to think about it is the sort of Bayes idea, right? That the human expert is the one who came up with the prior, but the mechanics of going from the prior to the posterior, which is the Bayes evidence, the Bayes factor, is a mechanical formula which says, well, given this evidence, what should I say should be the movement in from prior to posterior? So you can have a way to combine expertise with AI, which I think will be very, very key. So that's where I think this field is heading, is the combination of those two things. And the last bit, which I think we all heartily agree, things like, what is the value of this decision? Is it worth it? Data scientists are notoriously bad at that, as was said yesterday, which is they will give you the answer, and this is the accuracy. Does it matter? How do I use it? The accuracy is 60%, and people get very discouraged. Oh, it's only 60%. It's like, no. The prior was 10%. The fact that you got it from 10 to 60 is a $200 million impact. I don't need it to be 90%. Having that conversation with the stakeholder, being able to frame that problem, figuring out what the value function is I think invaluable. And that's, of course, where the DA professional comes in. But that mapping is where I think the biggest bang for the buck is. So I think working together, but then also understanding what each other does is key to that combination of AI and human judgment.
So building on that question, one of the questions that's come in, I think, is appropriate. What is the most effective way for machine learning-derived insights to be injected into a human-led decision process? And perhaps I'll add on to that to say, can you give examples of when that's been successful?
Right. So as I was beginning to say here, what usually happens in the human judgment process is things like value, objective, what is the real decision, here are the alternatives, how much is what worth, right? So if I want to go A, B, C, here's what the implications would be. I think then machine learning comes in to say, if A were to happen, I need to move my understanding or my prediction of something from something with this much confidence. So we try to use machine learning as the unit or the box that helps you figure out. Let me pull back. I'm maybe getting too confusing here. To me, I think the issue here is there's prediction, there's action. Right? So you've got the data, the prediction, and the action. Machine learning will help you with the prediction. Because it is powerful, it can incorporate new types of data, like the unstructured data I was talking about. But when that gets you to the prediction, you still have the last piece. The action comes from the decision-making process that's been laid out to say, if I get this prediction and it is so accurate, if I roll it out in this following way, then taking this action will give me this impact or this value, whatever your measure is. So I think there is a logical way for these three things to fit together, which is why one of the important things is this cross-functional approach, right? The idea that you've got certain people who really know data. They're called data engineers now. The title keeps changing. The middle piece is the data scientist. They are coming up with the prediction, the algorithms, and so on. And they're obsessed about accuracy and precision and all those things you heard about. But action is where you need the consulting, the DA professional to be able to map that final piece. And so you need all of these three working together on a team, which is the approach we've taken in our company. Joanna said, I have 100 data scientists. We have probably about 300 DAs and another 1,000 data engineers. I think this is an example from Microsoft. For every data scientist, they need 10 of the other people. So it's not just about the data science, it's about creating this cross-functional ecosystem to make sure the whole thing works.
I think, do you mind if just to add on, I might come at it from an additional but hopefully complementary way. What I have found leading an analytics function over the past couple of, many years, is that we typically tend to be in a PowerPoint culture. We're a PowerPoint culture. We get in front of senior leaders. We walk through some numbers. They raise more questions and have more hypotheses. We go away for 3 weeks. We churn more analysis. We try to get on everybody's calendar. We come back together 3 weeks later. We have more hypotheses. Something that we've tried to do at Pfizer is we've created an interactive analytics studio. And what we're doing is we're actually bringing all of these cross-functional experts into the room together at the same time. And so if you take all of the experts that we were just talking about and you put them in the same place and you bring in your commercial partners and your medical experts and your regulatory colleagues, and you're actually like walking through the data real time. You're actually running the algorithms. It's like the talk yesterday about, do you feel better with Orbitz or do you feel better with Kayak? Because you see the work happening in front of you. We've actually tried to make it so that our colleagues are seeing the work happening in front of you. Now, granted, there's a lot of prep that goes into that. We're developing the algorithms. We're looking at the data. But in terms of injecting the human decision part and incorporating machine learning into that, we have found that when you're actually bringing people together all in the same room and you're having them all talk through the data real time, you're having them generate additional hypotheses real time, that you're trying to answer real time, that it creates some kind of cross-functional ownership for the data as opposed to the black box feeling that you have when a team kind of continues with that sort of PowerPoint mindset. And so that's like one real like tangible action we've taken to try to. And we've modeled it after actually music studios where you have a singer and you have a producer and you have a recorder. And it's the same philosophy with an interactive studio, is that you have all these different cross-functional people that are key to like make it successful. And it's been a game changer for us in terms of making other people feel owning the data and insights in the process as much as we do as an analytics function.
Thank you.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
So something that I'm actually pretty excited about in terms of AI and machine learning is actually the generation of alternatives. Right? So I started my career as a lens designer, and 1 million years ago, software packages enabled you to do constraint-driven optimization and alternative generation. You press a button, The machine went through a bunch of constraints, did the simplest thing that it could do to get as close to your desired outcome, given those constraints, and ended up giving you a whole bunch of alternatives, which you could then look at and say, huh, stupid, oh, interesting. And so I feel like with the technology that we have today, that's a huge area that can help open up our perspective. It's a little bit different. I mean, I think oftentimes when we think about machine learning, or we think about using data to help us forecast, to understand what the past has been, so we can think about the future. But alternative generation is an area that I think, if you don't have the right alternatives, you can't make the best decision.
So Leslie, I might stick with you for the next question to lead us off. So how can we use decision analysis to mitigate the extent that AI reinforces and amplifies bias inherent to data?
I don't know. I struggle with even outside of AI, right? The broader question: how can we use any technique to mitigate bias and be more neutral in our perspective? I haven't thought about that, and I don't really know what to say.
right.
I'm very curious what my colleagues here will
Julie
will
Pratap?
say.
Maybe I'll just jump in on the DA front, because we've faced bias the same way as I'm sure every company does. It's not an indictment on any one organization. We pay people to be deep rivers of thinking, and so and then we ask them to step outside those rivers, and I think it's very hard. Something we've also tried to do is bring in the component of an external challenge. So as part of the decision analysis process, you can very much look within your own walls to actually drive your assumptions and to determine your analysis and to determine your alternatives and to put different ideas on the table. But what we've tried to challenge ourselves to do is almost create an anti-team that's external to Pfizer. And so we've actually, and I think you all probably do this in different ways. We've just formalized that process where we literally are hiring external KOLs across a couple of different dimensions to challenge the phase 3 programs that our teams are putting forth. And they put forth a very rigorous assessment from a commercial perspective, from a payer perspective, from a regulatory, and from a clinical development perspective. And what we do is we actually, the external challenge team summarizes their findings about the program. The actual internal team has a chance to almost rebut what that process is, but our most senior leadership has a chance to review both. And so we've tried to put that in place as a way of somehow creating an anti-team for ourselves. And I would say that, hopefully in the end that challenge back and forth, the goal is to have a great end product at the end, but it's just one mechanism that we've tried to put in place that forces us to have people outside of our walls. And it's different than the KOLs that you might be talking to every day about your trials. It's really like a separate set of colleagues that aren't as emotionally investigated and aren't as emotionally vested because they're either not investigators in your trial or otherwise. This is completely an external objective team, in addition to the objective team that we have internally. So that's one thing we've been trying to do.
Yeah, I think on a more less human scale, one of the challenges we found is data is very biased. So that is one caution. People keep saying it. Let me reiterate it. If the data is biased, the problem with the AI algorithm is not just that it will be biased, but you will not know that it is so, right? Because you don't understand what's going on if it's a black box approach. You have a neural network, it's got 2,000 coefficients in it. I don't know what it's doing. So you have to be very careful about that. So that's one of the concerns, and this has become an ethics issue. I mean, it's being debated generally in society. So one of the approaches goes back to my point of how do you figure out how to combine expertise with the data? And one approach we have taken, now admittedly this is not for big D decisions, it's for small d decisions, is to say, let an expert articulate all the situations. So yeah, data hasn't seen this, but the expert using some experience and some analogs and some benchmarking, not one expert, a collection of 10 of them, comes up with essentially a way to think of the expert system, right? Old style, if then rules, whatever it is. But there's enough parameterization left that data can come and tweak that knowledge base. So what is left at the end is something you can understand, but it has been reparameterized and shifted slightly because of the data that's coming in. And as time goes by, 3 months pass, the thing is learning. So the meaning of the rules is shifting. Certain rules are dropping out, but at least the meaning of this entire base, what it's trying to do, is transparent enough.
Julie, next question is, can you give some examples of areas or tasks where machine learning algorithms were particularly helpful? And what traditional analyses did those algorithms replace?
Yep, so I'll point to one. It's been a public one that we've talked about before. It's we have a product in development to treat a rare form of cardiomyopathy. The condition's called transthyretin cardiomyopathy. I'm sure there's a lot of scientists here who are more, but I call it affectionately ATTRCM. And only 1% of these patients are actually diagnosed correctly. 99% of the time, these patients are misdiagnosed with heart failure. And we actually have a product in development that's designed for this rare disease population. And the key was, how do you find them? How do you find these patients? And so we actually we use machine learning to actually mine a significant amount of electronic medical records, of massive amounts of structured and unstructured data, to actually develop algorithms to be able to go and with higher accuracy predict which patients would have this ATTRCM condition. Now, what I was talking about before with the cycle time of leveraging this information is when you're starting to talk about diagnosing patients and you're starting to talk about putting an algorithm in the hands of physicians to diagnose these patients, and you're talking about working with IDNs to diagnose these patients, you better be real sure that the algorithm you put together is accurate and valid and that the signals are real. And so we've spent an extensive amount of time working with our internal medical community, our access team, our external KOL community. And what we found is that we were able to improve the prediction, and I can't say how many, but a significant portion, the accuracy of patients that we were able to diagnose with the TTRCM condition as opposed to heart failure. And when you have a medicine that's actually, going to be in the market, you want to be able to find these patients. But as a pharma company, we're at a bit of a disadvantage because obviously all that patient data is blinded to us. We don't have access to any of that information. So now the task is upon us to work with our field force to educate physicians. It's on task with our access community to make sure we have publications around the algorithms. We're on point with different payer organizations to actually try to help them apply these algorithms to their populations where they can identify these patients. So this is, to me, it's like a real hopeful example that we have where you're really trying to take that machine learning and fix a situation. Previously, we would have just been doing market research. We would have been doing market research with physicians. We would have been trying to understand how they see these patients. And this is a case where the data and being able to examine the data and look for characteristics that we might not have seen, that cardiologists might not have previously seen, that can hopefully point these patients toward a product that can be life-saving for them and overall improve outcomes down the road. So I'm really hopeful about how we can use machine learning in the space of improving diagnosis, improving adherence, improving treatment, but it's a long time. It's been a 12 to 18-month process for us to go from actual data ingestion, algorithm development, to the much longer process of activating those algorithms in the external community so you can actually help patients.
Sorry, I'm reading a question. It's a follow-up question to that, Julie, that just came in. So in your example, I'm just going to read it. Would the regulatory approval in this case be a combination of drug plus AI-driven prediction of a patient? Or would you think about using AI in confirmatory trials?
Yeah, so not yet. So this is the trials purely based on the, scientific merits of the program, and it's going through a standard like regulatory process like any other medicine we have in development. So, now what we're doing is like figuring out how can we lever machine learning to actually find those patients. I guess, again, I'd want to defer to my regulatory. I don't want to answer a question on that about whether we can do that from a trial. But I think we're all trying to head there. Like everybody's trying to figure out how can you head there. But for this particular product, like I would say the approval process has followed the very like traditional path that you'd expect from a pharma perspective. Now we're trying to supplement it from a machine learning perspective to see, how can we actually try to find these patients so that they can get the medicine that they need.
But I think
Is that punting the question?
No, but
Sorry.
I think it paints a picture, right, of what the future may hold, and the more that we can think about these elements, I think the more interesting, or perhaps, we'll see how obviously drug development evolves.
I would love to get some perspective because the FDA is in the room, but Commissioner Gottlieb, I know we are going to lose him shortly, but one of the things he's been talking about is, can we bundle some of these quote-unquote predictions with the label of the drug, right? So the idea that, in fact, one of the things he has talked about is an app that a patient can use to self-medicate to figure out OTC medications. Do I need a medication, and if so, which OTC medication, because no doctor's involved, right? That's going to involve some sense of AI because it's something that's giving advice to the patient or answering their questions or asking them questions. So that whole idea, this is the future, no doubt. But if the regulatory agencies move towards this future, it also changes how we approach product development, just along the lines of what Julie was talking about.
Machine learning depends on data. How will the relative importance of different types of data evolve? For example, claims data, social media content, or good old clinical trial data. Any thoughts or perspectives on that?
So one thing that we are seeing in healthcare, and I'm going to step out of the pharma lens a little bit, is this following idea, that if I figure out what drives a person's health and look at all the data that affects a person's health, only 10% of health is explained by clinical EMR and all the stuff that's happened to you medically. But to answer that question, in healthcare, if you're going to go after societal health or even individual health, we have to get much broader in our understanding of what data means. It's this 10/30/60 claims data and all the things we are used to in pharma is a sliver of the 10. Of course, Genentech, Roche are making big investments in the genomic data aspects with Foundation Medicine and others. So you can see that gradually that fan is opening up, but we have to really understand all 100% of it if we are going to be in the business of improving health.
Here's a question that has come in from a few folks. So if I'm a decision analyst and I don't know much about AI or machine learning, where do I start?
Hug a data scientist? No.
No, I think many suggestions were made yesterday. So they were all excellent suggestions. I think Andrew NG's courses are a good starting point. And I think, again, the idea is not for a decision DA professional to know AI in depth, like coding and everything. But my suggestion, at least know what's possible, how it works, what the concepts are, what the pitfalls are, what kind of predictions are being produced so that I know how to think about them in the context of my action recommendation, right? That linkage. You don't have to necessarily code in R and know exactly how deep learning algorithms work. You can go there, but I would say that's stage 2. I think stage 1 is really having this broader sense of what is possible and at a pretty high level how it works. And there are many good courses, including in Coursera, on this.
Can I? So I think what I would say to somebody who is interested in that is to just try something, right? And a story about that is that one of the folks in our organization is a statistician, and he's our friend. We get together for lunch every once in a while, and there was some curiosity about how this kind of machine learning could be of interest to our organization, and a lot of conditions are diagnosed by scans, and so in one of our lunches, there was some curiosity: can we do better at diagnosing conditions based on the scans? And so, we picked a disease that we know something about because of our portfolio of products, got a bunch of scans, we have these things because we run clinical trials. Basically, what he found out, wrote a little bit of code, how good can I get at diagnosing this condition? He found out that basically by referencing people who had known condition and then looking at new scans, he was able to do much better than existing rates of diagnosis, right? And, this is just like people getting together over lunch and, eating sandwiches. So, just try something.
Yeah, and I think to follow up on that, and I've said this in my organization, data scientists in a vacuum are not going to necessarily generate, and hopefully you may agree or disagree, but I don't think so based on what you said before about the number of data scientists versus engineers versus consultants. Data scientists in a room don't come up with all the insights on their own. What data scientists understand how to do is stitch together massive structured and unstructured data sets. How you apply the intelligence on top of that in terms of what's the signals and noise, which is what I was saying before. Everybody who is a decision analyst has deep expertise in being able to understand the signal versus the noise. So for example, we were looking at clinical trials and understanding different sites and their productivity at different sites. Sure, you can have signals that come up about sites and whether or not different European sites are better or whether or not other sites are better. But it's actually the people who understand and operate across those different sites that were actually able to understand why something came up and what was real and what wasn't real. And so we're not at a point yet where decision scientists can't operate in a vacuum on their own. They need that partnership.
Thank you. So given where we are on time, what I'm going to do is ask each of you to leave the audience with a few key takeaways. And Leslie, maybe I'll start with you.
So I think there's a lot of exciting things that can come out of machine learning, artificial intelligence for decision analysis. And I think we also need to to continue to think about what we don't know, to think about how uncertain the future is and that the past is not predictive. In particular, I guess what I see is that as we spend more and more money developing drugs, we put down giant nickels for phase 3 trials, that people want to feel more certainty about that. And so the tendency is to collect more and more data. And I'm not, and I think that in that direction, the pharmaceutical industry dies. At some point, we need to be devoting an appropriate amount of resources to drug development and determining what that appropriate amount is, and walking the right, very narrow pathway is something that we need to do. So if we can keep our focus on that problem so that we can help people in the most financially efficient way so that the healthcare budget doesn't take over the world, then I think that machine learning and AI will have been very helpful to DA.
Thank you, Leslie.
So, a couple of takeaways. I think, as I've been saying, I think each side needs to get a better appreciation for the other so they can work together, because that cross-functional approach that was described is really key. So I would say, as DAs, get some of that appreciation for what DS can do, because you're the people who will translate the prediction to the action or the impact. So that's one thing. I think the second piece is, the exciting part is, because you get that appreciation, you can formulate new questions, or you can break down the decision in a new way that hasn't been done before. That's also going to come from DA. It's not necessarily going to come from DS. And the last bit is, the panel was about, will AI replace DA? I think AI will replace many parts of the practice of medicine before it replaces DA. So that's a future that's a bit of a scary future, but 10 years from now, I saw the news yesterday, the AI has exceeded the average pediatrician in China. AI has passed the last medical exam in the UK. So the stuff is coming gradually, whether it's reading images or something else, and that will change how pharma needs to think about drug development. because the thing making the decision is no longer a person. So if that happens, then you of course have to think about the decision very differently. That's 10 years in the future, 15 years maybe. So I'm not going to make a big deal about it. But the idea that think about the decision and how to break it down differently, I think that's the most exciting aspect of what's happening right now.
Thank you, Pratap.
I don't know how to add on to that, except we'll be a robot panel next year. Just automated responses. No, I'm just teasing. I think the summaries were great. I think you just have to be really open. I lead a very large organization. I was not as familiar with this space 4 to 5 years ago. I've immersed myself in it over the past 4 years. It's about just engaging and understanding how these different capabilities can supplement and augment what we do. And it's knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, and how to bring in the people that can actually help enhance and develop what we do, and so hopefully to exceed what we do today. Our industry will be disrupted. There is no doubt it will be disrupted. The question is, are we able to disrupt ourselves, or is somebody else going to disrupt us? So the sooner we can all kind of try to expand our thinking and open our aperture to these other types of approaches and how they can complement what we do today, I think we'll all be better for it. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you to my fellow panelists. Thank you to the DAG conference organizers for having us. And most importantly, thank you to all of you for your very active engagement as far as having this dialogue, asking questions. And I think this is, as all of the panelists alluded to, I think this is a dialogue that's going to keep going. So I look forward to continuing to have it with you. Thank you.